Hello, and welcome to show number 2629 of Eyes on Success, a weekly program empowering the visually impaired with expert advice, personal stories, and the latest in technology and accessibility. I'm Nancy Goodman Torpey.
And I'm Pete Torpey.
I think if I had this dream and I was sighted, this dream would not have become a book.
You know, sighted people don't always have the advantage. There are some advantages to being blind sometimes, and this story is an example of a person who made use of some blind skills or the fact that he was blind to do what he did. By the way, we'll be looking for input from our listeners about this topic, and after we give the contact information at the end of the show, we'll have some information on a show we want to put together with help from our listeners. So keep listening till the end.
Vivid dreams can spark incredible creativity for any novelist. We'll talk with Aaron Spelker, a blind author who transformed his nighttime vision into a captivating science fiction book. His journey demonstrates how assistive technology, determination, and a little bit of AI can allow creators with vision loss to navigate the publishing world. But first, for our tip of the week. This week's tip comes from Aaron Spelker.
So I would say my tip of the week would be, and it popped into my head as we were talking, which is, again, there's nothing from stopping you from just going ahead and taking that first step to do whatever it is that you're interested in. So again, with my book, I just decided to one day start writing and start doing it. And again, there was low barriers of entry with the technology. And all it really takes is to take that first step and do it. So I had put the book on the back burner for 5 years before I actually started writing it. There's nothing that really stopped me from doing it earlier other than I just didn't take that first step. So take that first step and start progressing towards that goal of whether it's writing a book or doing whatever it is that you are interested in accomplishing.
And you certainly can't take the second, third, fourth, or subsequent steps unless you take that first step.
You are listening to Eyes on Success. Success, 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 success.
Today's guest has been with us twice before on Eyes on Success, and today he's going to tell us about a new book he wrote and the mechanics of writing that book as a blind person. So, Aaron, for people who may not remember you, can you reintroduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Aaron Spelker, and I live in Massachusetts, and I am a blind individual, but that is a new experience for me. So I just became blind about 7 years ago. I got a bacterial infection in both of my eyes that ended up causing me to go blind. So one day I was sighted, and the next day I was blind. So it's been a interesting adventure over the last 7 years, kind of learning to live in a completely different world, from a sighted world to a blind world.
And I understand that you were just beginning to lose your sight as you were starting the first book you wrote, which we talked to you about several years ago.
My first book, which is called The Bubonic Reorder, I had thought about it when I was sighted, and I had started, doing research and taking notes about it, but it always sat on the back burner because I was working and I was doing a lot of stuff, and I just kind of fooled around it, every once in a while. And then when I went blind, I kind of was not working, and I didn't have really a goal or a purpose, and I was feeling pretty aimless. So it was something that I picked up and said, well, let me do this. This is something I can do for hours a day and, kind of move towards a goal. And it was a very interesting experience because when I picked it up, it was only kind of a few weeks after I had gone blind. So, I didn't know JAWS. I didn't know how to touch type without looking. I didn't know how to surf the internet as a blind person at the very start of writing that book as a blind person. So it was a big challenge. And it took me probably a lot longer than if I tried to write that book now. I would get through it a lot quicker because everything was new and fresh and, overwhelming when I wrote the first book.
What's interesting is if you think about trying to learn JAWS and some of these skills as a blind person, and you didn't have a real mission or task in mind, it'd probably be very difficult. But actually, I'm guessing applying those new skills to a task made it somewhat easier to learn.
I definitely agree with that. I mean, anything is, if you learn something, but then you never use it, you're going to forget how to do it. And again, as I said, I was really spending, 6 hours a day, either writing or trying to search on the internet. And I had to learn how to do JAWS, and I had to learn how to type without looking. And there really wasn't any other option, and there was no way to cheat, and there was no one around. My wife was at work and my kids were at school, so there was no one to ask for help. It was just on me to kind of figure it out. So I think it really, over that time of writing the book, I think it really sped up my technology skills. I mean, today I'm actually an accessibility trainer for other people who are blind and visually impaired on things like the computer, and teaching them, the internet and Word and Excel and Outlook and, all of those things. And I do, the iPhone and iPad and Android phones and things like that. So I don't know if I would be a technology trainer today, or at least this quickly, if I didn't have, that intensive, just doing it every day, 6 hours a day, just go, and try to figure it out.
Well, and probably being somebody who made the transition and had to learn all of these skills differently recently, probably, I would guess, makes you a better trainer.
It is all fresh, and I can really connect with a lot of people who are going through vision loss, because it is relatively fresh and new to me. And the other thing is, when I sit with somebody who was sighted at one time and did something when they were sighted, it's easy for me to say, remember when you were sighted and it looked like this?
Right.
We have that common language because I was sighted once and I saw it once at the same time. So it's easier in some ways to explain things to people who were once sighted for me, just because we have a very easy common language to kind of have that dialogue with.
So before we talk about the process of writing the book as a blind person, tell us the name of your second and most recent book and what it's about.
This is a sci-fi noir. It's called Eclipse Meridian. And basically the story is that you have these two worlds, Varga and Aurelia, and Varga is kind of like the manufacturing, mining, blue collar exploited worker who are just trying to get through one more day. While Aurelia is the planet that is the clean, pristine, perfect society of rich elites. And what happens at the beginning of the book is a dead body is found on the transit authority property on Aurelia. And the transit authority allows for transportation between these two planets. And therefore, that's under the joint jurisdiction of the two planets. And the book from there does a lot of comparing and contrasting of those two planets and those societies through the two investigators. The Vargan investigator, whose name is Rail Narrow, is kind of suspicious, doesn't trust authorities, willing to break the rules to get to the truth, thinks everybody has an angle. And his partner from Aurelia is kind of like the perfect Aurelian citizen who believes in rules and regulations and policies and procedures, and believes what the superiors tell him, and never will break a rule. And so these two investigators are trying to solve this crime from completely different perspectives and societies and history. And as they uncover some uncomfortable truths, there are powerful forces that do not want them to figure out what is happening here and what the true story is this. So it's kind of a race between, can they solve this crime in time before the evidence and the powerful forces bury the truth?
So as a blind person, you must have an interesting way of visualizing the world when you're making these new environments. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so what's interesting for me, at least, with both books, they both came out of dreams that I had. I had on both books had very vivid, like movie style dreams that laid out pretty much the entire plot, probably on each of them about 80% of the plot. And the scenes was just from this dream I had. And I woke up and I just wrote down what I dreamed. And, that ultimately turned into both the first book and then the second book. What's interesting, again, is I see the images of what I want to write as kind of a picture in my mind. And I don't know if that's different for someone who's sighted versus blind, but I can picture the colors, I can picture the scenes, I can picture exactly how I want it to look. And then the hard part is just trying to get words to get that scene down on paper to come out anything like what I kind of pictured in my mind when I dreamt each of the stories.
I would guess some of that depends on when you went blind in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thankful that I had, the years that I had as a sighted person, because it does make things easier to visualize how things are supposed to be. And, it also, again, when me and my wife are talking, she can point to things. You remember when we were here and you saw that building, it looks like that, so we have something that makes it easier for her to explain to me, what something looks like or what some person looks like.
Yeah, my experience is fairly similar. I had a reasonable amount of vision for most of my life, but I don't have any vision now. But my brain sort of fills in pictures. I mean, I could swear I could see people as they move around, raising their hands and stuff. And of course, I can't. But the brain just fills in a lot of that stuff if you have some of that historical memory to rely on. Amazing what the brain can do.
Yeah, I mean, that visualization sometimes gets me in trouble because I'll be in my living room visualizing where the ottoman is and someone's moved it. And I just plow right into, the ottoman because I'm not being careful because the ottoman should be to my left. It shouldn't be straight in front of me. So my mind has pictured it. So I've lived in my town for about 25 years and 20 of that as a sighted person, or about 20 of it as a sighted person. So when I walk around my town, I visualize every building. As I'm walking around, I don't think of myself as blind because I can picture what the town hall looks like and the Dunkin' Donuts and the town green with the gazebo. I can picture it all as I'm walking around. That's also very different when I go to some town I've never been before. I explain to people, particularly those who had sight and seen the movie, it's like the Matrix when Neo goes into the Matrix at first and it's just all white. There is no context to anything. You don't know what anything looks like, so it's hard to paint a picture of it when you have no context of what it looks like. I spend most of my time in my hometown walking around, and so I have these feelings like that I'm not very blind, and then I go somewhere that I have never been before, and it's a stark contrast. It really goes, oh yeah, I am blind. I kind of forgot.
Back to the book, you said these images came to you in a dream. And now you're discussing the difference in how a blind person versus a sighted person maybe would describe an environment. Do you feel like you're describing them from the perspective of a blind person? Because you kind of saw them in your dream. And I know a lot of blind people who have had sight are still dreaming with images that would appear in the dream, even though in the world, they wouldn't be able to see them.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm explaining it or trying to get down on paper, an actual visual image that I see that is very realistic to what things really look like. And again, because I have that context of prior vision to know what the house looks like or what a spaceship might look like, because I've seen other movies with spaceships in it. You know what I mean? So I have a sense of what that should look like. So that explanation is really coming from a point of a sighted context.
Presumably, your original dream was just a few minutes long before you embellished upon it to create an entire book. Now you're doing that from the vantage point of a blind person?
Well, I don't know if other people have this. I have dreams, like when I have a dream, it doesn't feel like a few minutes. It feels like literally I just watched a 2-hour movie. I mean, there's sometimes I wake up and I feel exhausted, like I just did mental gymnastics because it was whatever I just dreamed about was so intense. And some of them are just, kind of not interesting in any sort of way. These two, happen to be, I thought, interesting and compelling, and maybe other people would be interested in hearing about them. So that's why I took, the time and effort to try to write them down.
I understand that you got into the habit of recording your dreams.
It was funny on this one. I dreamed it and I woke up. I remembered that I woke up and that I dictated into my phone what the dream was about. And then I went back to sleep, and it was kind of like a week later that I was like, oh yeah, I had that dream and I know I dictated into my notes. So let me go look at what the notes were. And the notes were really detailed. It was like 2.5, 3 paragraphs of stuff about that story. I'm like, I don't remember dictating all of this.
Wow.
It was really detailed. I remembered more of the dream than I remembered actually dictating down the dream.
But that was a good idea for you to record your dream, because I think a lot of these dreams happen when you're kind of almost about to wake up or so. And, your mind's a little bit foggy, but if you can record it right away, you can get it down before your brain sort of erases it for you.
Right. If I had that dream, the eclipse meridian dream back when I was sighted,
mm-hmm.
I probably would have tried to type it out.
Yeah, it would have taken too long.
It would have taken too long. Exactly.
And it's not a typewriter by the side of your bed.
Right. But because I'm blind and I do everything by voice command, I just said, "Hey Siri, record this note," and then I just dictated it all.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have done that.
Right. Right.
If I had that dream as a sighted person. So that's another interesting thing around. I think if I had this dream and I was sighted, this dream would not have become a book because I would not have jotted it down in time or to the depth that I could have dictated. And I was only dictating because that is a thing I now do and is part of my life as a blind person. So it's such a different approach to things. I didn't really think about that until just now, but that is, how this technology is playing a role into just how things get done in my life or how it impacts my life.
Fascinating. What an insight.
Now you've written 2 books, one when you were recently blinded and one after you've had some experience with the tools of being blind. What was the difference in your experience writing both books?
With those 2 books, the experience of writing them was very different as a sighted person and newly blind person versus today. Just even the technology back when I first wrote the first book, The Bubonic Reorder, first off, I didn't really know any technology as we discussed, so I was learning everything new. And there wasn't the same technology that we have now. So if I needed to figure out, in that book, how diseases transmit or how you contain a pandemic, which is kind of what that book's about, I had to do a lot of Google searching and reading white papers and doing a lot of things. Well, in today's day and age, there's technology where I can just ask ChatGPT, I'm trying to get the answer to this question, and it'll tell me the answer. So the research kind of was a lot quicker because the technology was a lot quicker. And then some of the technology too, again, with that AI stuff, I kind of at the end of writing this book, I fed it into ChatGPT and I said, tell me, do I overuse words? How's my punctuation? Do I change tenses? It kind of did like that first pass editing for me and kind of pointed out some things of like, oh, you kind of say the same thing in chapter 2 that you say in chapter 7. It's kind of redundant and might bore people. It kind of pointed some of that out to me, which I thought was, interesting and fascinating that this technology in just 7 years has advanced to be able to give kind of an analytical opinion of, your writing and give you kind of suggestions of, you change tense between paragraph 3 and paragraph 4, and, the rest of your novels in the same tense as chapter 3. So, fix chapter 4 accordingly. I thought that was really interesting on the technology between the 2 books, or as an author trying to use the technology to write the 2 books.
So were you tempted to ask one of these AI engines to rewrite your book?
As anybody who's read anything that is from AI, it kind of a little soulless in a way, and that's not the fun of writing the book. I mean, the fun of writing the book is writing the book. So I use it more for trying to correct my writing, not do my writing. So as an example, I did a lot of writing in my career before I went blind, but it was all technical, analytical writing. It was not telling a story. So there are things where I'll give you a perfect one, something I learned from my first book. I learned in my first book that I barely used contractions. And it didn't really dawn on me because contractions sounded weird with JAWS, because it would say like dawn apostrophe T instead of don't back when I was doing JAWS with that. And I think I just mentally started avoiding using contractions because it sounded so odd. But when somebody who's really reading a book, it sounds weird to not have something in contractions. So you kind of, want to, learn the right way to write something. So one of the things I used at technology here was around that. I said, where did I kind of should have used a contraction where I didn't, and had to kind of point that out to me to help me clean things up to sound a little bit more natural sounding than what I might have written down from a more formal standpoint, which is my more natural writing because of the technical writing I used to do as a career.
So it sounds like you used AI primarily as an editor to help clean up what you had written yourself.
Yes, as a, what they call line item editing. And then I did use it for some research. So like I said, I have these 2 planets that orbit around each other. And, what I first asked ChatGPT is like, is that a thing? Is that actually, possible in the world? And yes, it is. You can have 2 planets that orbit each other. And then I said, well, how is 2 planets that orbit each other different than a planet and a satellite like the Earth and the Moon? Like what actually makes that different? And, it explained to me that in the Earth and the Moon, the gravitational center of the Earth and the Moon is actually within the Earth. That's where the gravitational center is. On two planets, the gravitational center lies between those two planets, in space. And that's what makes it a planet orbiting another planet versus a planet and a satellite. And I got that answer in 2 seconds by asking AI, as opposed to probably a day's worth of researching and reading and trying to figure it out, which is what I would have done back when I was originally writing the book, before AI was such an easy thing to, get answers to questions. So, research on this book was a lot quicker.
You could have just asked your friendly neighborhood physicist.
Right.
If you had one.
Right, exactly.
So you talked about using JAWS and AI as part of your writing tools. Are there any other tools that you found very useful?
So I wrote everything in Word, which I like as my writing tool. Obviously did a lot of internet searching as well as doing, AI, questions and stuff like that. But, the nice thing about writing is there isn't a lot of technical things you need. You need an imagination and a keyboard, or, a piece of paper if you're sighted. And that's all you really need to put a story down. So there's a really kind of a low barrier to entry to getting your ideas onto paper, other than, the time and the effort. That's it.
And what about when it comes to publishing the book? What was the process there?
Yeah, so I published it through an indie publisher, which is actually, they're called Wicked Infinity Publishing, and they are based here in Massachusetts. And it is a small independent publishing company that is owned by a blind woman, which I thought was kind of nice as well to do, to have this blind author, using a blind publisher, and just have kind of a whole experience be, through our community.
Do you think that sort of greased the wheels for you? Because it's hard to get things published by actual publishing houses.
What I liked about it is, she's blind, so she knows, the struggles as a blind person, and she writes her own novels as well. So she kind of knows what to look for. So I found it just a very comfortable experience, and the communication was in a way that was easy for me, not me having to try to translate, a sighted person doing the things sighted people do sometimes, like, well, if you look here, right there, that doesn't look good, or it doesn't sound right. It's like, well, where are you? I don't know where you're circling on the screen, because I don't see that. That was kind of more my experience of the first one, where there was kind of a struggle of communication between the person who kind of did the editing on my first book, was a sighted person. There was kind of a barrier of dialogue or communication to really work through with that person. And I really didn't have that experience with this time around. It was very easy to communicate and have a discussion.
And was it as simple as sending your completed Word document to them, and they worried about the layout and how it was all going to look and all?
Yeah, exactly.
So the editors on their end cleaned it up, and then I guess they took care of advertising and distribution?
Yep. And yeah, Wicked Infinity Publishing. So I highly, particularly if you're a blind author, looking for some help, I highly recommend.
Do you know any of their contact information offhand?
Daisy Russell is the woman's name, but I don't know her email off the top of my head. I'd have to look it up.
Well, Aaron did get back to us with Daisy Russell's contact information, and her publishing company is Wicked Infinity Publishing, LLC, with the web address www.wickedinfinitypublishing.com, and you can reach her by email at info@wickedinfinitypublishing.com. But we will be doing another episode in which we talk with her, and we will get into many of her experiences running a publishing company.
Where might people be able to find your books?
This one, I just kind of narrowly focused it. I put it out on Kindle, and I did it as Kindle Unlimited, just kind of, again, make the barrier to entry really low for people. If you have a Kindle Unlimited account, it's free for you to download. If you don't have a Kindle Unlimited account and you have to buy it, I just made it real low cost. So it's $1.99, which is very, cheap, easy entry. So very, very different than what I did kind of in the first book, which was a large book, available in print, available in ebook, available across all of the different platforms. This one, I just kind of narrowly focused it.
Do you have a website?
I have a Facebook. So my Facebook is under the Bubonic Reorder, is where kind of all the stuff for my first book. And then I started releasing some stuff on the second book. I kind of put it under there because I kind of built up the audience at that location. So anything, when I do interviews and stuff like that, I just kind of post it all out on Facebook.
And what should people look for on Facebook?
Yeah, if they look under the bubonic reorder, Bubonic, and then space, and then Reorder. That's where they would find kind of my author page that I created.
And if people had questions for you about the process or yourself, is there an email that they can use?
Yeah, probably the easiest place to reach me is it's my name, which is Aaron, M for Michael, Spelker @gmail.com.
And of course, you can find all of that information in the show notes for episode 2629. And before we say goodbye, we're requesting some input from our listeners. At the beginning of the show, we talked about that there are sometimes advantages to being blind over being sighted in terms of what you can do and certain capabilities you might have. And Aaron certainly gave an example of that. And I'm sure others of us have other examples in terms of being problem solvers and other events in your lives in which being blind was an advantage. So we're looking for input from our listeners. If you want to send us a short 1 to 2 minute MP3 or a link to an MP3 or just a text email of what advantages you might have experienced being blind, we'll put together another show about that. And you can send your input to us via email at the address hosts@eyesonsuccess.net. That's hosts, HOSTS, at eyesonsuccess.net. And we're looking forward to what your thoughts are. And one more thing, let us know if it's okay to share your name in the show that we finally produce with your input. Thanks.
That's it for today's show. After spending this week talking about a science fiction book, next week we'll delve into some real science, but don't worry, not too deeply. We will be talking about the fact that sighted people think blind people are impaired because they can't see what the sighted people see. But relative to all the information that's out there, even fully sighted people can see only a tiny sliver of the signal. And we call that the visible spectrum because that's the only tiny part that's visible. But nobody can see microwaves, X-rays, ultraviolet, etc. And everybody needs to compensate for that inability. It's sort of like your dog can hear a whole lot more than you can. Only we'll be talking about the visual part of that.
You've been listening to Eyes on Success, available wherever you get your podcasts.
For show notes, resources, and more information, visit our website at eyesonsuccess.net.
Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, I'm Peter Torpey.
And I'm Nancy Goodman Torpey. Thank you for listening.